Welcome to For Them from MJ Fan TV. Latest Michael Jackson news, biopic updates, and box office reports. If you love MJ, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into today's update. Fire Michael Jackson biopics $1 billion takeover continues. Hollywood is still in shock. Crown Clapperboard Moneybag, how are you, Michael Jackson family? Welcome, come back part 2. 98% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you're a true Michael Jackson fan, show your support by subscribing to our channel and giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps us bring you more amazing Michael Jackson content. Now, let's get started. Fire Crown Section 4, The Major Turning Point. A family divided. A daughter goes public, and Colman Domingo steps into the fire. If the legal crisis was the production side earthquake, the public family drama was the cultural aftershock that nobody saw coming, but everybody watched unfold in real time. Let's set the scene. It is September 2025. The reshoots are done. The release date has been confirmed, April 24th, 2026. The marketing campaign is gearing up. And actor Colman Domingo, brilliant, charming, universally admired in Hollywood, gives an interview to People magazine in which he casually mentions that Paris Jackson had been very helpful to him during the production of the film. It seems like a throwaway line, a polite acknowledgement. Within 48 hours, it had ignited a firestorm. Paris Jackson, 27 years old, musician, model, activist, and the middle child of Michael Jackson, responded to Domingo's comments in a series of Instagram stories that were direct, raw, and deeply personal. She made clear in no uncertain terms that she had not been involved in the production. She had briefly met Colman Domingo twice, she said. She was not a resource for the film. She had not been consulted in any meaningful way. And then she went further. She revealed that she had read one of the earliest drafts of the script, that she had given notes, that she had flagged things she felt were dishonest, things that didn't sit right with her, and that her concerns had been ignored. The film panders to a very specific section of my dad's fandom that still lives in a fantasy, she wrote. The film, she suggested, was not a truthful portrait of her father's life. It was a curated, controlled narrative, a Hollywood product designed to sell tickets and protect a legacy rather than to illuminate a truth. And she wanted no part of it. I don't really like dishonesty, she added, as pointedly as 5 words can possibly be delivered. The reaction was instantaneous. Social media erupted. Fan accounts for Michael Jackson were furious at Paris, some calling her disloyal, others calling her attention-seeking, others questioning whether she even knew her father well enough to judge. Media outlets covered the story with breathless intensity, recognizing it as exactly the kind of family drama that resonates with audiences in a way that abstract production controversies never can. But Paris was not done. In a follow-up statement, she drew a comparison that was both precise and rhetorically devastating. She likened her experience to that of friends and family members who had spoken out about the depictions in Bohemian Rhapsody and the Motley Crue biopic The Dirt. The thing about these biopics is, it's Hollywood, she said. It's Fantasyland. It's not real, but it's sold to you as real. The narrative is being controlled. That framing, biopics as Fantasyland, controlled narratives, Hollywood's relationship with truth, landed with particular force given that Michael was a film the Jackson estate had directly co-produced, co-financed, and approved at every stage. This was not a rogue production that had gone behind the family's back. This was, in a very literal sense, an official story. And Paris was saying that official stories are not the same as true stories. Colman Domingo, to his enormous credit, responded to Paris's criticism with grace rather than defensiveness. I hope that she eventually loves the tribute that we made about her father, he told Wall Street Journal magazine in a subsequent interview. He did not argue with her characterization. He did not double down on his earlier claim. He wished her peace, but the controversy had already taken on a life of its own. Here is where the Jackson family dynamics get genuinely complicated and important to understand. Catherine Jackson, the family matriarch, was firmly in support of the film. Her tearful response upon first seeing Jaafar in costume,
"That's Michael," had become one of the most quoted moments in the entire promotional cycle. For Catherine, a woman of deep faith who had watched the world debate and dispute her son's legacy for decades, the film was not a commercial product. It was an act of love, a restoration, a chance for the world to see Michael Jackson the way she had always seen him, as an extraordinary artist, a deeply sensitive human being, a beloved son. Prince Jackson, Michael's eldest child, had gone even further in his support. He had not merely endorsed the film from a distance, he had embedded himself in it, serving as an executive producer, being present on set every day, shaping the film's development from the inside. For Prince, the film was clearly a project of deep personal meaning, a way of participating in his father's story rather than simply inheriting it. LaToya Jackson attended the Los Angeles premiere and was effusive in her praise of Jaafar's performance. "We all forget and think we're watching Mike," she said on the red carpet. "It's like, oh, I forgot this is Jaafar." She spoke warmly of her nephew's work and addressed Janet's absence without bitterness. "I wish everybody was in the movie." She was asked, and she kindly declined, "So you have to respect her wishes." Janet Jackson, the most loaded absence in this entire story. Janet Jackson, one of the greatest entertainers of her own generation, one of the most significant artists in the history of popular music, chose not to participate in the film about her brother. She was asked. She declined. She has made no public statement about the film itself. Her silence is eloquent in a way that speaks volumes about both her relationship with Michael's legacy and perhaps her own reservations about how that legacy is being managed. And then there was B.G. Jackson, Michael's youngest child, who attended the film's premiere in Berlin, but has remained publicly silent about the project. The family portrait that emerges from all of this is not the unified, loving tableau that the marketing campaign would prefer. It is a family in which different members have reached genuinely different conclusions about what honoring Michael Jackson means, about what truth requires, what loyalty demands, and what the world deserves to know about a man whose life was at once transcendent and deeply troubled. Paris Jackson's criticism, meanwhile, was not operating in a vacuum. It was happening at precisely the same moment that the Jackson estate was facing a new legal challenge, a lawsuit from a family alleging that Michael Jackson had sexually assaulted 4 siblings when they were children. The estate denied the allegations. But the timing, a new lawsuit arriving just as the heavily promoted, estate-controlled biopic was gearing up for release, created a context for Paris's comments that made them feel less like a family squabble and more like a genuine moral statement. Observers on social media were divided, as they always are. Many fans saw Paris as a troublemaker, someone stirring up problems around a film that was clearly made with love. Many others saw her as the only member of the family with nothing to protect, and therefore the only one willing to speak a hard truth. And some pointed out that her description of the biopic experience, notes given, notes ignored, a narrative controlled from outside, was not unique to her situation, but was in fact a nearly universal experience for the families and close associates of subjects of Hollywood biopics. She was not wrong about that. Bohemian Rhapsody famously minimized Freddie Mercury's bisexuality, according to critics who found the film's treatment of his personal life sanitized and incomplete. Elvis conspicuously sidestepped Elvis Presley's relationship with Priscilla, whom he met when she was 14 years old. The Dirt was criticized by some as a glorification of behavior that included serious accusations of sexual abuse. Hollywood biopics have always played fast and loose with the facts. Paris Jackson was pointing at a systemic practice and noting that her family was now participating in it. But none of that changed the fact that, when the film finally opened in April of 2026, audiences voted with their wallets in a way that was unambiguous and overwhelming. And what happened at the box office was so extraordinary that it completely reframed the conversation. Because the story of Michael had now become something far larger than a family dispute or a production crisis. It had become a referendum on Michael Jackson's legacy, on the power of music to transcend controversy, on the ongoing war between critics and audiences, and on the question that Hollywood has been circling for years. In the era of streaming and shortening attention spans, Do people still go to movie theaters for big, emotional, music-driven stories? The answer, it turned out, was a resounding, unambiguous yes. Section 5. The fallout and public reaction. Critics versus audiences. The 33% that broke the internet and what really happened in those theaters. The critical reception to Michael was, by any conventional measure, poor. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film settled at a 33% critics score, a number that would normally spell commercial disaster. The reviews that drove that score down ranged from measured disappointment to outright hostility. Critics pointed to what many called a hagiographic approach to its subject, a film so determined to celebrate Michael Jackson's artistry that it systematically erased the complications and controversies that defined the second half of his public life. The decision to end the film in 1988, during the bad tour, drew particular fire, since it meant the movie never had to reckon with the allegations that began in 1993, the 2005 trial, the increasingly eccentric behavior of Jackson's later years, or his death. One prominent critic writing for Slate described the film as being full of so many elisions and oversimplifications that at times watching it feels like being gaslight. The same review noted a stunning omission, that the film seemed to skip over Jackson's first 4 solo albums entirely and imply that 1979's Off the Wall was the beginning of his solo career. That it reduced the legendary Quincy Jones's creative contribution to essentially turning up a microphone whenever Michael steps up to sing. Other critics noted what they described as flat narrative beats, inconsistent makeup, and a sense that the film was so reverential toward its subject that it never quite found the dramatic tension that makes great biographical films compelling. The subjects of the best biopics, Bohemian Rhapsody, Walk the Line, Ray, Tanya, Judy, are typically complicated, contradictory, often deeply flawed people whose stories derive their power precisely from the tension between their genius and their humanity. When a biopic refuses to engage with the flaws, critics argued, it loses that tension. And without tension, a story becomes a highlight reel. Owen Gleiberman of Variety was more measured than most, praising Jaafar Jackson's performance specifically, noting that he gets Michael's tentative high sugary voice just right, and shows us how that famous personality evolves, while acknowledging the film's limitations as a piece of dramatic storytelling. The academic and analytical framing offered by some film journalists was particularly sharp. As the Wrap's coverage pointed out, this was, in the phrase that would come to define the cultural moment, it's 2018 all over again. Bohemian Rhapsody had been panned by critics for glossing over Freddie Mercury's personal life and presenting a sanitized version of Queen's history. It had a 61% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. It had gone on to earn $910 million worldwide and win 4 Academy Awards. History was repeating itself in a way that was almost eerie in its precision. Because the audience score for Michael from opening weekend was 97%. 97%. That is not a strong audience score. That is not a very strong audience score. That is one of the highest audience scores in Rotten Tomatoes history for a film of this scale. It represents something close to a unanimous verdict from moviegoers, delivered in real time, as they filed out of theaters and immediately reached for their phones to register their reactions. The social media conversation around the film's opening weekend was unlike anything the entertainment press had witnessed for a biographical drama in years. TikTok was flooded with videos of people filming their reactions as they exited theaters, people sobbing, people dancing, people looking genuinely shaken by the emotional impact of the experience. A specific sequence involving Jaafar performing Billie Jean apparently sent multiple theaters into spontaneous standing ovations. The moonwalk, when it appeared on screen, reportedly caused audience members to actually gasp. This was not the reaction of people watching a film they had been told to admire. This was the reaction of people who had gone to a theater expecting to be entertained and had been, in some cases, genuinely overwhelmed. The debate between critics and audiences that erupted in the wake of the opening weekend was fierce and multifaceted. Film critics, many of whom had spent years arguing for the relevance and value of professional criticism in an era when social media makes everyone a reviewer, found themselves on the defensive in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar from the Bohemian Rhapsody era. Vulture critic Bilge Ebbery offered perhaps the most honest and perceptive framing of the problem. Most of the people who get angry at critics for not liking any big movie these days aren't even engaging with criticism. They're upset about Rotten Tomatoes scores and crap like that. This isn't art for them. It's sports. That observation captured something real about the nature of fandom in 2026. The way in which loving an artist has become, for many people, a form of tribal identity, a team affiliation, something to be defended rather than interrogated. For the millions of people who grew up with Michael Jackson's music, who remember where they were the first time they heard Thriller or Bad or Man in the Mirror, the biopic was not primarily a cinematic text to be analyzed. It was an emotional reunion, a chance to be in the presence of something they loved. And for that experience, they were prepared to give it a 97% on any scale offered to them. But here's the thing about the critics' position that deserves to be stated clearly. They were not wrong about the film's omissions. The question of whether a biopic about Michael Jackson has an obligation to engage with the child sexual abuse allegations that defined the second half of his public life, that generated one of the most famous criminal trials of the 20th century, that continue to shape how a significant portion of the world views his legacy, is a genuinely serious question. It is not a question with an easy answer. And dismissing it as critics being party poopers or missing the point is itself a failure to engage with the complexity. Industry analysts drawing the comparison to Elvis, the 2022 Baz Luhrmann biopic that sidestepped the story of Elvis Presley's relationship with the then 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu, were making a legitimate point about double standards and the genre's consistent pattern of selective truth-telling. Elvis had been nominated for 8 Academy Awards. Bohemian Rhapsody had won 4. Hollywood had repeatedly rewarded exactly the kind of crowd-pleasing biographical filmmaking that critics found intellectually dishonest. The question of whether Michael would follow that pattern, whether its commercial success would translate into awards recognition, remained genuinely open as of late May 2026. Multiple factors complicated its Oscar prospects. The critical score, the continuing legal controversies around the Jackson estate, and the nature of Jaafar Jackson's performance, which was widely praised but existed in a film that reviewers generally found lacking as a whole. Variety's analysis of the award situation noted that inconsistent makeup and flat narrative beats would likely cap the film's awards prospects, even as it acknowledged that the double standard applied to biopics in the genre had never been consistently enforced. But whatever happens at award season, and award season is still months away, the commercial story was already being written in real time. And it was one of the most remarkable stories the entertainment industry had seen in years. Section 6, Deep Dive Analysis and Future Implications. What this film means for Michael Jackson's legacy, the estate, the music, and the future of biopics. Let's step back from the day-to-day drama and look at the bigger picture. Because Michael is not just a movie. It is an event. And events of this magnitude have implications that ripple outward in ways that take months and years to fully understand. Start with Michael Jackson himself, with what this film means for how the world thinks about and relates to his work. The streaming numbers are the most immediate and concrete measure of the biopic's cultural impact. According to Billboard data cited by multiple outlets, Jackson's solo work registered a career-best 137.5 million official on-demand streams in the United States in the week of April 24th through April 30th. That was up 146% from his previous career high. According to the streaming analysis platform Chartmetric, Jackson's biopic drove roughly 748 million additional streams in the 4 weeks following the film's release, pushing him to 102 million monthly listeners on Spotify, a figure that placed him in the company of artists who had released new music in the past calendar year, not artists who had been gone for 17 years. The soundtrack repackaging was a significant part of this story. A separate Spotify upload of Thriller tied to the Michael songs from the motion picture soundtrack had generated, by late May, roughly 910 million plays on its own, a staggering number that illustrated how effectively the biopic's promotional machinery had created new streaming context for material that already existed. Playlist ads for Jackson's music exploded from 30 ads across 22 playlists in the 2 months before the film's release to 374 ads across 134 playlists in the equivalent period after. Those placements reached a combined audience of nearly 119 million playlist followers. This was a commercial resurrection on a scale that most legacy artists can only dream of. And it was a commercial resurrection that had been engineered, at least in part, by the Jackson estate's decision to invest heavily in a major biographical film, to control the narrative, whatever the critics said about that control, and to make Michael Jackson's music central to a 2-hour theatrical experience that would send people directly to streaming services the moment they got home. For the estate, which has been one of the most valuable and aggressively managed celebrity estates in history, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in the years since Jackson's death through music licensing, merchandise, and brand partnerships, the film's success represents both validation and opportunity. Validation of a strategy that had been controversial from the beginning. The decision to move forward with a major biopic despite the Leaving Neverland controversy, despite the legal complexities, despite the criticism from Paris Jackson and others. And opportunity in the form of a sequel that producers are now clearly eager to develop. That sequel, the one that would be implied by the story continues closing card, presents both enormous commercial potential and genuine ethical complexity. According to reporting from Variety, studios suggest roughly 30% of the material cut from this version of Michael could be reconstituted for a potential follow-up. Producer Graham King has spoken about focusing future films on Jackson's later albums, Dangerous from 1991, Invincible from 2001, the purchase and construction of Neverland Ranch, and, in his words, his love of animals. That framing, emphasizing Jackson's music, his creativity, his love of animals, the wonder of Neverland, is obviously a very deliberate one. What it conspicuously does not mention is the trial, the allegations, the Leaving Neverland documentary, the last years of Jackson's life, when he was living in self-imposed exile, deeply isolated, increasingly dependent on the doctor whose administration of propofol would ultimately kill him. How any sequel could navigate that period of Jackson's life. Without the Jordan Chandler settlement clause as an obstacle, Chandler died in 2009, though the settlement's terms may well survive him. With Leaving Neverland accusers Wade Robson and James Safechuck still very much alive and legally active, is a question that nobody in the production appears to have answered publicly. It may be that a sequel simply stops before those years. It may be that the estate will never produce a film that engages with those events honestly. Or it may be that the commercial pressure of a billion-dollar success story and the implicit promise of the story continues card will eventually force a reckoning with the fuller truth. None of that changes the reality of what the music means to people. And that reality is perhaps the most important thing to hold on to in this entire story. Michael Jackson's music, not his personal life, not his legal history, not his eccentric behavior, not the allegations that cloud his legacy, but his music, the actual recordings, the performances, the sheer volcanic creative output of a career that produced off the wall, Thriller, Bad, Dangerous, History, and the catalog of Jackson 5 classics before any of it. That music is genuinely, objectively extraordinary. It changed popular music in ways that are still being felt today. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time. The influence of Jackson's choreography, his vocal style, his production innovations can be traced directly to virtually every major pop artist of the last 4 decades. And for the millions of people who flooded into theaters to see Michael, the film was primarily a vehicle for experiencing that music in a new way. A live, theatrical, communal experience of something they had loved for decades. The allegation against Michael Jackson, the man, does not erase what Michael Jackson the artist created. Many people hold both of those truths simultaneously. The art is extraordinary and the allegations are serious. The biopic, whatever its flaws, gave those people a space to celebrate the art. And they showed up in numbers that suggested a vast, underserved appetite for exactly that kind of experience. For the broader film industry, the implications of Michael's success are significant. In a landscape where studios have spent the last several years agonizing over how to get adults back into movie theaters, the biopic demonstrated something that some had begun to doubt, that non-franchise, non-superhero films can still generate blockbuster numbers when they connect with audiences emotionally and culturally. The Michael audience was not chasing spectacle for its own sake. They were chasing connection. They were chasing memory. They were chasing the feeling of sitting in a dark room with strangers and being collectively moved by something. That is, in its essence, why movies exist. And in the spring of 2026, a film about the king of pop reminded a somewhat jaded industry of that fact with irresistible force. The comparison to Bohemian Rhapsody is impossible to avoid and worth examining in some depth. That film, which came out in 2018, also starred a relatively unknown actor, Rami Malek, who won the Oscar for his performance. In the lead role, was criticized for glossing over its subject's personal life and opened to relatively modest domestic numbers before an extraordinary international run. Had by May of 2026 logged $910 million in total global box office. It was the highest grossing music biopic in history. Michael, as of the first week of June 2026, has crossed $846 million worldwide, with less than $65 million separating it from Bohemian Rhapsody's record, and with the film still showing strong weekly additions of more than $50 million globally. Industry observers expect Michael to become the new highest grossing music biopic in history within weeks. The $1 billion milestone, which would make it the first music biopic ever to cross that threshold and only the second biopic of any kind to do so, appears to be a question of timing rather than probability. The parallels between the two films go beyond the numbers. Both were overseen by Graham King. Both were critically divisive. Both sparked public conversations about what biopics owe their subjects and their audiences. Both featured staggering performances at their center that seemed to transcend the limitations of the films around them. And both demonstrated, with unmistakable clarity, that the global appetite for music-driven biographical cinema is enormous, far larger than Hollywood had previously assumed. If Michael ultimately crosses the billion-dollar mark, it will not just be a commercial record. It will be a statement. A statement about Michael Jackson's enduring global cultural significance nearly 2 decades after his death. A statement about the power of music biopics as a genre. A statement about the gap between critical gatekeeping and mass popular appetite. And perhaps most poignantly, a statement about what it means to miss someone. To go to a movie theater and sit in the dark and watch a young man who looks impossibly like his uncle dance the way his uncle danced, and feel something that no streaming algorithm or playlist can fully replicate. Section 7. Final revelations and emotional conclusion. What this all really means and where the story goes from here. There is a moment in Michael, according to the reports of audience members who have described their experiences in the theater, where Jaafar Jackson, fully embodied as his uncle, steps into the spotlight for a performance of Billie Jean. The music starts, the familiar bass line, and something happens in the audience. People who have seen the film describe it differently. Some say the theater went completely silent. Some say people started crying without knowing why. Some say that for a moment, just a moment, the distinction between the person on screen and the person whose music they had grown up with dissolved completely. That the 40-odd years since that song first played on the radio collapsed into nothing. That they were there in some impossible way with him. That is what Michael Jackson's music does to people who love it. And whatever you think about the film, about the estate, about the allegations, about Paris Jackson's critique, or the critics' 33%, that moment is real. The emotion it triggers is real. The cultural significance of an artist who can generate that response in a theater in 2026 17 years after his death, is real. Let's talk about where we actually stand as of early June 2026 and where this story goes from here. The film has grossed $846 million worldwide and is closing rapidly on the $910 million record set by Bohemian Rhapsody, with the film adding more than $58 million globally in the week ending June 1st. The pace suggests it will surpass Bohemian Rhapsody's record before the end of June. Whether it reaches $1 billion depends on its staying power in the coming weeks, but analysts remain optimistic. A crossing of the 1 billion threshold, which would make it only the second biopic of any kind after Oppenheimer to reach that milestone, seems genuinely possible if international markets, particularly Japan, South Korea, and Latin America, where Jackson's fan base remains extraordinarily devoted, continue to perform. The estate is clearly planning for a sequel. Though the story continues card is not a stylistic flourish. It is an announcement. The question is when and how that sequel materializes, and what creative choices will be made about the complicated later chapters of Jackson's story. Producer Graham King has spoken about a focus on the dangerous and invincible eras and about Neverland Ranch, which opens the film to the years between 1991 and 2005. Years that include some of Jackson's most creatively ambitious work alongside the most damaging period of his public life. Navigating that era honestly, without the Jordan Chandler restriction as a legal barrier, though other legal complexities undoubtedly exist, would be a genuinely different creative challenge from the one the first film faced. For Jaafar Jackson, the film has been nothing short of a career-defining moment. He arrived at this project as virtually unknown to the general public. He is leaving it as one of the most talked about performances of the year, praised by audiences and many individual critics alike for a portrayal that seems to have captured something essential about his uncle's physical presence and emotional quality. Whether the film's overall critical reception affects his individual awards prospects remains to be seen, but he has clearly demonstrated a talent that extends beyond his famous name and his famous resemblance. For Paris Jackson, the experience of this entire saga, reading a script, giving notes that were ignored, watching the film get made and released to billion-dollar success while she stood publicly apart from it, calling it a fantasy and watching the world largely not care about her critique, must be genuinely strange. She has said what she believes. The world has, for the most part, chosen the fantasy. That is the nature of entertainment culture in 2026, and it is not entirely a comfortable truth to sit with. For the broader cultural conversation about Michael Jackson's legacy, the film has done something unexpected and important. It has made him present again. Not just in the streaming numbers, not just in the box office tallies, but in the cultural conversation. People are debating his music, his artistry, his personal life, the allegations, the trial, the estate, the biopics, all of it simultaneously, loudly, with genuine feeling. The argument about Michael is also always an argument about Michael Jackson. And that argument about genius and accountability, about separating art from artist, about what we owe the dead and what we owe the living, about whether a 67-year-old man who died alone in a rented house in Los Angeles is best understood as a victim of fame or something darker. That argument has not been resolved by this film. It has been renewed, amplified, sent to 1 billion more people. That may be the most honest thing you can say about Michael. It is not the definitive account of Michael Jackson's life. It is not even a complete account. It is a chapter, a specific chapter, curated and controlled, celebrating what can be celebrated. And it has made the world want to know what comes next, which is, whatever else you want to say about it, exactly what the best films do. The King of Pop is not gone. Not as long as his music plays and people feel what they feel when they hear it. Not as long as his nephew can step into a spotlight and make a theater go quiet. Not as long as his daughter is still fighting in her own way for what she believes is true about him. Not as long as his mother, at an age when most people have long since retreated from the world, can look at a screen and say, "That's Michael," and mean it with her whole heart. The story continues. That is the promise. And in the case of Michael Jackson, there has never been any doubt that there is more story to tell. The only question is, will Hollywood find the courage to tell it? Conclusion. So where does all of this leave us? Michael has shattered box office records. It has reignited the streaming catalog of one of the greatest artists in music history. It has divided a family, divided critics and audiences, and divided the public along familiar lines between those who believe that celebrating art means accepting complexity and those who believe that celebrating art means focusing on the music and leaving everything else to history. It has given us Jaafar Jackson, a young man who trained for years to carry his uncle's legacy and delivered something that audiences have responded to with near universal emotional force. It has given us Colman Domingo's portrayal of Joe Jackson, which early reactions described as one of the most compelling performances in the film. It has given us the story of a production nearly destroyed by a legal clause nobody remembered, rebuilt from scratch at enormous cost, and somehow delivered to theaters on a wave of anticipation that defied every projection. It has not given us the full story of Michael Jackson. It has never pretended to. The man's life was too large, too complicated, too painful, and too extraordinary to fit into any 2-hour film, or any 3.5-hour film, or any 2-part film, or any piece of art at all. He was someone who changed the world and was broken by it, who created music that will outlast anything written about him, who was loved and revered and suspected and acquitted and mourned and debated and remembered, all at the same time, by the same people in the same breath. Michael is not the final word on Michael Jackson. It is the latest word. And given what it has done at the box office, given what it has done to his streaming catalog, given that the story continues promise on its final frame, it will not be the last. Somewhere out there, right now, there are people sitting in a theater as the lights go down. And when the music starts, when that familiar bass line begins, when Jaafar Jackson steps into the light, they will feel something. Something complicated. Something enormous. Something that has been waiting 17 years to find its way back to them. That is the power of Michael Jackson. And no box office record, no critical score, no family feud, no legal clause buried in a decades-old settlement can take that away. The story continues, and we will be here to tell it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you. That kind of dedication is why we make the content we make. If you have thoughts on the Michael Jackson biopic, on the family drama, on the critics versus audiences debate, or just on what Michael Jackson's music means to you, drop it all in the comments below. We read every single one. Hit that subscribe button if you are new here, and we will see you in the next one.